So the state of Texas is banning the purchase of chips, soda, junk food, basically with EBT. Mind you, the price for single ingredients for one meal will run you anywhere from $60 to $80. 60 is being generous. So I don't see, one, why that was any of their business, and two, why would they do such a thing when inflation is at an all-time high right now? And what about those people who don't have access to a home that can, cook and stuff like that? Like, it just don't make sense to me. But hey, I guess we just gotta let them do what they do.
Don't be shocked.
So the state.
All right, what's going on, everybody? It's Professor Zeus, and I'm back with another video. If this is your first time on the channel, just know I greatly appreciate you for stopping by. Go ahead and hit subscribe. We're on our way to 2,000 subscribers. We're all taking the humble route, guys. Listen, so today we have this woman here saying, food stamps, they shouldn't be restricted from buying certain types of food. Saying whose business is it what type of food I buy with my EBT and things like that. And we're gonna have a discussion, and I'm gonna obviously put her link in the description so you guys can follow her, support her, and do all that great stuff. Because I try to give credit when it's due. So let's get into this discussion, right? So essentially, this woman, she's arguing that if you're on government assistance, you got EBTs and all that type of stuff, you should be essentially able to buy whatever you like, right? Chips, soda, candy, all sorts of junk food, whichever, right? And she's essentially saying, inflation's going crazy, prices are going up, essentially like, let me live, right? And I totally understand her on inflation. Groceries, their prices are obviously ridiculous right now, and it's affecting everybody. My grocery bills are like car payments. But when she says, whose business is it? We've got to take a step back, right? Because whose business is it is actually the taxpayers' business, and I pay my taxes, so essentially it's my business, right? Because taxpayers are the ones who are funding this, right? And I'm not saying you have to, crawl, grovel and all this type of stuff, be ashamed for like looking for help and things like that. But there's obviously another side of the discussion that we have to explore, right? So when we talk about what EBT is supposed to do, it's there to make sure that people, especially children, don't go hungry. All right. I'm obviously fine with that. I'm cool with that. But why are we fighting, based on her argument, why are we fighting, to be able to spend it on junk food, right? Texas, I believe that's where she is saying that, no more Doritos, Mountain Dews, Cheetos, right? And on the taxpayer's bill, you know what I mean? I'm not necessarily mad at it. Why? Because half the health problems we have in society, diabetes, ADHD, kids jumping all over the place going crazy, can tie back into processed food, processed garbage, all the stuff that we ingest. Red dye 40, preservatives, sugar, super extreme processed sugar. None of it is natural, right? So if the government is essentially saying, let's try to feed people better, I can see myself aligning with that, right? But where it gets messy, she's obviously looks, put together, her hair's done, her nails look, well done. She's got a chain on, she obviously looks good and put together. But she's complaining about restrictions, right? And I'm like, ma'am, who's taking care of your children, right? I used to work as a leasing consultant back in a few years ago in luxury apartments in DC, right? And I was able to see how this hustle essentially worked, right? Black woman, listen, I'm just going off of what I saw when I was a leasing consultant. Predominantly Black woman would come to the apartment, would apply, they, had a whole bunch of kids with them, and will conveniently leave the father out of these leave the father of these children off the application. Why? Because if he's on the application, then they together don't qualify. Or they'd have to deal with, child support drama, all the other restrictions, and DC has its own way of going about who can qualify for certain what was it called? Dwelling unit. It was something dwelling unit. It's this program that DC has, right? It's a finesse. Essentially, it's a finesse, right? And I get why they do it, right? The system's rigged, but it's also a cycle, right? More children, more benefits, no father in the picture, and then you have the government is stuck raising the family, right? And that's not freedom. That's essentially a trap, right? And we've all heard the stories of, like, going to the store, and then you'd see, people trying to try to sell, their food stamps for actual cash. And it's an interesting dilemma, and it's interesting when you get to see with your own eyes, right? And it's obviously been like that for some time, because it's systematic now, right? Back in the obviously back in the 90s, food was cheaper, but the same hustle was there, right? Now, with inflation going crazy, the EBT, it's not stretching the same, you know what I mean? But here's my thing, right? Why complain about the value dropping if you're out here trying to finesse it, right? I've seen people on assistance, right? And it's like people pass down living on Section 8 almost like it's a part of the family dynamic. Like, you have to pass down, like, just like I'm on Section 8, I gotta pass it on to my son. My son has a son, and he gotta pass it on to, like, how? Why? Right? I know people, right? Their families were never able to get out of certain situations, right? And I'm not against helping people when you can, or helping when you need it, when you're looking for it, because people have so many different ways of struggling. But when it's a lifestyle, and you become upset that you can't actually buy, Twinkies and Twizzlers with, assistance, it's like the taxpayers aren't your ATM, right? And honestly, you save so much money by cooking it at home, right? Real meals that can last for a whole week, right? You don't need junk food, right? And not everyone's got a kitchen, I get that, right? But most people do, right? It's all about choices, right? So, her saying, whose business is it? It's ours. Anybody who pays taxes, it's our business, right? I'm not here to judge her life, but I have to call it like I see it, right? The system is built to keep people locked in, having more kids, having the father out of the picture, and getting bigger checks to do who knows what with it. I saw it in DC. I saw it growing up, and we've got to break the cycle, right? Not try to argue over oatmeal cream pies. Let me know what you guys think. Drop a comment. Should EBT have restrictions on junk food, or no? Is that a little bit overboard? Smash that like button. Again, hit the comments. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and share this video to anybody who might see some value in it. And never ever forget, it's you and I verse: information, application, execution. Until next time, peace.